IPAC meeting for 31st of May. Can't believe it's the end of May. And the sun is shining and it's a beautiful day. So that bodes well, I think. Bear with me. Kia ora koutou i ngā rangatira. Mihi atu ki te kaupapa o te rā. Nō reira, tēnei rā koutou katoa. Can we move on to apologies, please? We have one from Councillor Cook and one from Chairman Horrible. Somebody like to move those, please? Thanks, Jeremy. Councillor McCallum, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Declarations of interest? None. Public forums, petitions, deputations? None. Confirmation of the minutes of 9th of March, please.
I can do that.
Thank you, Councillor McCallum. Seconded, please. Councillor Beard. Any errors or changes to those?
Didn't see any.
Me neither. All right, I'll move those then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. I've had no notification of extraordinary or urgent business, so we'll move on to questions, and I've had no written questions submitted, so we'll move on then to...
Madam Chair, just, you were going to have sort of matters arising or matters that need addressed
Yep.
from meeting to meeting?
So that's the Chairman's report now. So that's the next item. And you might have noticed that there are two parts to that. There is one in the public session and one in public exclusion.
I have a question about the cash flow. I can take it at the end if you like.
Yeah, okay. So moving on to item 8. You'll see the written report that we were going to have a workshop, but that was covered not in a separate workshop, but in one that we had this morning. Okay, so that has been completed. Right, that takes us to item 9.1, which is the long... Oh, no, sorry. Nearly forgot then, Rachel. We've had a request from staff to move item 6. Hoping that's the right one. Yes, so the CCFA and Clean Air Loan Scheme item on page 289. Due to staff availability, we would like to take that first. If councillors are okay with that. Yes, thank you very much. So welcome, Rachel, thank you. So we're on item 9.6, page 289.
Okay, so through you, Chair, I'd just like to introduce Anka Hipgood, who is a staff member who's been with us for a few weeks and came on board as a senior strategy advisor within the strategy and partnership team at the beginning of April and has been working in the airspace. So Anka, with Tania's help, has done most of the background for this item, so I'll hand over to Anka.
Great, welcome, Anka.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks for shifting the item forward so that helps with my availability. The agenda item is right near the back. It's on page 289. Basically, it's to highlight the fact that there have been some recent changes to the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act, which we call the CCFA for short. And as an organisation, we've had to work through what their potential implications are for our Clean Air Loan Scheme. So we've worked through a bit of a process, and our understanding is that Environment Southland is not captured by the changes to the CCFA. Essentially, our role in the scheme is to contribute financially to both the City Council and the District Council in order for those councils to administer the scheme, and so that's the main reason why we're not captured by the CCFA. We've written to both the City Council, Invercargill City Council and Gore District Council to query where they're at with working through those changes to the CCFA, and basically it's something that we're working through with them. And in the meantime, there's also a target in the long-term plan regarding the review of the Clean Air Loan Scheme, and it is timely given those changes to the CCCFA. So an aspect of that review is establishing a baseline regarding the number of residents who have adopted practices that improve air quality, which is also a target in the LTP. And so that's also something that will be useful to feed into the review of the scheme as well. So now there's a contract in place for that research, and that fieldwork is going to be undertaken within the next few weeks. And while that's happening, we're doing some initial groundwork in terms of the actual review of the scheme as well. So hopefully that'll all kind of fold into place in the coming near future. There's also a council air workshop coming up quite soon too, which hopefully these things will fall into place and we'll be able to discuss them at that air workshop that's coming up. So that's pretty much it in terms of summarising the agenda items.
Fabulous. Any questions? It's pretty clear. Bruce?
Thank you. Thank you, Anchor. Just one real question. You solved it very quickly by saying, in our view, it's Gordon and the Cargill issue correct, and you've written to them, that's fine. Should they have been doing something by now out of interest? Did you form an opinion on that? I know that's their problem, but did you form an opinion that they should have been doing something by now?
Yeah, I guess it's a situation where all councils actually right around the country are working through this and grappling with the changes to the CCCFA, so it's just work in progress at this stage.
It will probably be low risk, I would think.
Yeah, the other thing that I mentioned in the report too is that there are potentially some more changes coming to the CCCFA in the coming month or so, and so it's sort of like, a situation where some of those things that councils are concerned about may fall into place once those changes come through. So.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks. Councillor McPhail?
To answer Bruce's, they've stopped doing it. And that's from a personal experience. So I applied for one.
Gore District.
Well, the Gore District does it. Well, the Gore District since last December. They've been doing them, so.
Well, you mean the loans or the? Yeah.
No, it's just been.
Well, that's what I thought.
So obviously, ICC's not.
I'm not sure what. I know there's been a brief discussion about it as far as I know.
I think they've just a bit slowed down as well. I think the big issue here is there's no immediate risk, so that's the first thing. And the second thing is the two parts here, looking forward, we need those that review sooner rather than later, for very much the reasons that we have just stipulated. It's not actually doing its purpose, it's missing the point now, and we need to review that and move on. So I'm happy to move that, Madam Chair, because I think it's pretty clear where we're at.
Thanks. I would just add that the future plan for the air quality space and encouraging our residents is the key, actually.
Well, I think there's a bigger conversation to come, whether it's PM10 or PM2.5, and that's going to be looking at guidance from government. So, but I can only deal with what we've got right now, and the scheme really has run its course. So, we need to formalise that and then get an opinion going forward, working with others.
Anka, I'm not sure whether you're aware, actually, we have in the past administered loans for the Southland Heritage Building and Preservation Trust. So could you just have a wee squiz at how that is placed within this new regime, please?
Can you second the resolution and recommendation?
Thanks, Councillor Beard. Moved Councillor McCallum, seconded Councillor Beard. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks. Right. That takes us backwards to I'm there already. Thank you. To item 1, which is the long-term plan progress report. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. So this is the progress report for year 1 of the LTP through to the 31st of March. I guess to highlight, you would have noticed that there has been a progression during the year. So we started the year with very high levels of confidence that all of the performance measures and targets would be met. For that third quarter, we've seen a slight move into the amber space, so the number of greens reduced from 52 to 39, the number of ambers increased. And that's a reflection, I guess, of the story in many organisations with staffing shortages, a tight contractor market, along with those additional challenges that have been created by COVID. An additional factor for that third quarter was the water shortage situation, which meant that we did have to divert some resources to focus in that space. So our response has been to focus on priority work streams, which has meant that some programs have slowed, but still overall reasonably high level of confidence that the performance measures and targets for the year will be met, largely on track with some slippages which are highlighted in the report. So happy to take questions.
Yes, I have a few.
Thank you, Bruce. Take it away.
Hey, it's a great report. This is, I feel like I've been away for ages, and actually this really has, can I say, has smartened up. So well done. Seriously, this was much more readable. I got a better sense of actually the flow of work, and the reporting's good. So it actually means I've got a few questions, which is really superb. I think the bigger picture thing that I see, and you pointed out quite rightly, is the increasing amber as we get towards the end, and some of the things have fallen behind. Now look, I don't want to be, whatever, but I am interested that actually we're suffering from the water shortage shortage direction and diversion of staff effort. And it's suggesting that we actually can't make up that ground as a result, along with COVID, as being the prime drivers for why we're behind. That's correct, obviously. I guess perhaps I want to know why was it such a big effort, but that might be someone else to take me aside afterwards and tell me that answer, rather than necessarily it being now. But I'm just interested that's the case.
I think a good example is actually in the compliance area where they've noted that they're currently sitting at amber for the monitoring of priority consents. And they are still expecting, though, that they'll be able to rectify that situation, but there was a temporary diversion of staff to the water shortage situation. I would say that the bigger factors are the staffing levels and contractor market availability than the water shortage situation, but that has been a factor for the third quarter.
Okay. Look, and look at what it's worth, I can just assure you that my other unitary and regional council responsibilities, it's a similar story, and I'm not, so I'm not having a necessarily a crack, but just an understanding. Having said that, I just am interested at some of the things like we're behind on the freshwater accounting system. Yeah, I'm an accountant, so I like accounting, but I realise this is different in terms of freshwater. But what are the knock-on effects of that? Given we've got a push within the organisation, have to around fresh water, what's the problem with us getting behind with our accounting system?
So, through you, Chair, that would be one that I'd want to go back and talk to the science team a little bit more around, but as I understand it, it's largely driven, the freshwater accounting system, by what happens through our People, Water and Land program. So we are, I guess, not currently confident that we will deliver the performance target there, but the work is still being done through the People, Water and Land program that will enable to set that system up. We'll put the project plan in place reasonably quickly, but I can bring a more full report to the next meeting.
Look, it may be that gets picked up through your strategy and policy committee, and I'm comfortable if that is the right place for them to go to do that. I guess as a risk committee or as a risk member of this committee, I look at the overall program and where we're heading, and obviously freshwater more largely, which you guys will be all well more aware of, is where it's at. It's got to be a big item of strategic priority. And when I see things like the accounting system, which is small compared to the other parts of freshwater you got to deal with, it still nevertheless is part of the jigsaw that we've got to get in place. So I think I just wonder where that's at. The other thing I noticed was the if I can get this right, the the challenge to get to 30 June around the I want to say the iwi or Māori participation. I forget what it is. Sorry, I need to find it. It's item. It's 6 I think it's 6.3, isn't it? Yes, I'll find it. Sorry.
Develop and monitor Mātauranga Māori monitoring program.
Is Te Ao Marama happy with progress? I mean, this is affecting an external party. So when we're saying publicly we're behind, A, are they aware, and B, are they happy?
So, again through you, Chair, this is very much a partnership piece of work with Te Ao Marama and the Hokanui Runanga, and so the work to date has all been done together, and I guess that is one of the reasons potentially why we're a bit behind schedule and that we're all working together. It isn't something that's being led directly by Environment Southland, it's a partnership piece of work.
Okay. So that they know and they're happy with where progress is at, even though we're behind where we as an organisation want to be.
I wouldn't speak on their behalf, but we had our last meeting before April. There have been there's been email correspondence since, so it's something that's continuing to progress. There was provision made through the long-term plan for funding of this work, and it is something that will continue over the next 2 years as we trip through the LGP.
Brilliant. Sorry, look, I've got a couple others. I want to get them all while I'm here.
Sorry, Bruce, can I just, Lucy, I think, would like to contribute.
To add, through the chair, to what Rachel's saying, both regarding the freshwater accounting and also the Mātauranga monitoring program.
Yeah.
They're both intimately linked to the broader how we are going to limit and apply methods in freshwater, and so those streams are advancing, but they need to be done in conjunction with that broader piece about what the limit setting looks like. And so, in terms of establishing what the accounting system needs to look like, it's all a little bit chicken and egg.
Yeah, okay.
So we're trying to, and that applies to some degree to the Mātauranga as well. And Rachel's already alluded to, that's being done in partnership. And so they're very much aware that we're kind of creating as we're going,
Gotcha.
so that they all need to align.
Nice.
Oh, that's helpful. I mean, I made some assumption that, things like your accounting system would be foundational. So get that one to one side, you've got to understand, and then, it'll fit in. I take your
It's a
point.
bit tricky to know what we're measuring.
Yeah.
That's the kind of, we need to answer some of those fundamentals before we lock in the accounting system to go with it. So we're obviously committed to doing the project plan for the scoping and how that works, but in terms of what it actually will entail, we'll need to look as we go.
Councillor McCallum, did you have something on that point?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether, this is the third quarter, right? We're nearly getting to the end of the fourth quarter. I'm just wondering, Bruce, if we could get at the end of the fourth quarter the update and the reasons for the work program to get it back on track for next year is probably more important. We know where we are, we're running a little bit behind.
Yeah.
But what is it we're going to do to get that on track? Because the delivery time is basically set, as I understand it. We have to do work by a certain time. So it comes back to what does the recovery look like? That's really what I'm saying.
Yeah, so perhaps the question is, what will it take to get it back on track?
Yes, but we may not know that, and what I'm suggesting to staff is
Build it on such
at the end of the year, it may be more important than what it is right now. Give them the chance to have that question developed through their work streams and then bring it back.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd make some assumption you dealt with that in your annual plan.
Well, I'm saying that was.
Yeah. Hey, look, I'll leave it at one last question if that's okay, please, Lyndall. And look, I'm comfortable this needs to go up under PX, but I can't help but notice the red around the resilience projects. Oh, no, I was going to ask this question. Last time I was here, it was all a bit of admittedly in PX, but it was a substantial issue and challenge. And I think the critical thing was to stabilise and get it on track. I don't need to know the detail, but have we stabilised it and have we got it on track?
So through the chair, I can give the council some assurance that actually a lot of work has been happening in terms of the plan programme. And whilst the finalisation of that stabilisation hasn't yet been, that I'll be confident by the end of the quarter that actually some of those rates, as you described, could be back in amber or indeed even green. So, that's the process I'm still going through, and we'll be updating the council in due course. So, a message of confidence that some of those things are being addressed.
Appreciate that, that's good. Rachel, believe it or not, those are all my questions. I do have some more, but those are all my questions. So well done. I'm serious, Steve, this is a much better report. For some reason, when I was preparing, it was so much easier to read. So I'm deeply appreciative of the work you started here. It's great.
Great, thanks Bruce. Any other questions? No, somebody like to move that recommendation, please?
I'm going to do that. See, I've asked all the questions, so how's that? Yes, I move it.
Thanks Bruce, seconded by councillor McPhail. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried, thank you very much. And again, thank you Rachel and team. Right, moving to my next piece of item 2, the financial report, and you'll note that these all flow on nicely from each other now that we've rejigged the order of the. Well done, team. Financial report, thanks. Tanya.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am very happy with the order of the reporting because I felt that I was often referring to Rachel in the next item. So I think it flows better for everybody that we can talk about what has happened and then the finances are the outcome of that, Chair. All I would suggest is that, well, not suggest, I would like to point out that I've provided quite a lot more commentary this time and trying to explode the different parts. There's many parts of in our financial reports. So I've pulled out the operating surplus deficit and explained that the impact on the investment through the market changes in the market value and then where the government funded projects are at. So rather than labour that, perhaps I could take questions on each part or any part.
Sure. Any questions on the impact on the long-term plan section? Any questions on the operating surplus? Oh, Bruce does. I was too quick. Thank you, Bruce.
I'll try and stop laughing at the end of the meeting. It's just I've got so many questions.
No, it's all right, because I'm going to change my name tag to you.
That's right.
That's why you're here, Bruce.
No, I absolutely agree. Again, like the previous paper, A, I like the order, and B, I'm appreciative of the increase in quality of the reporting, so that's really, really superb. I've tried to go back one step, and I guess in the long run, it does go back to Lloyd's question. Do we have the financial capacity to make up for the ground we have lost this year? Through COVID, through the other things that have diverted us. Because looking at some of the explanations that you have provided, and you know, absolutely quite right, in terms of the savings, they are actually hard. I mean, they are permanent savings. The extra penalty, the salary savings you're saying, which we won't spend between now and the end of the year, $1.1 million operational costs. At a best guess, we've got $2.5–3 million savings, which we've got generally the revenue. Presumably that's benefiting our annual plan and our capacity to pick up the speed on the assumption we can get the staff and the consultants. Would that be right, Tanya?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Bruce. We have noted that it's a very important part of our annual planning. Given the headwinds from inflation and other challenges that you note, that having this buffer, as it turns out, is very beneficial, and it's certainly resulted in a better cash position temporarily than we expected. So that will be what will come out in the annual plan, is that we're going to be able to use that to the benefit of the ratepayers to buffer the rates and hold them at the level we promised in the LTP.
Yes, I just want to check I heard that right. You're saying we're going to use the savings to buffer the ratepayer and keep within our proposed rate increase in the LTP, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So how do we make good what we haven't delivered this year?
Sorry, in terms of the targets, you're talking about the earlier report.
Yeah.
Look, I can't answer that question except that I believe we will.
I think Lloyd might have whispered in my ear. He said, "Bruce, we have altered our targets," which is probably the case. What I'm trying to reflect on, it's not much different to CapEx. If we want to get to a certain place, this year, and we don't want to push our targets backwards, we've got to make up the ground this year as well as also do next year's work in 12 months.
I accept that, and I think there'd probably be somebody better placed than me to answer that, but I believe that we are going to work. Not all the targets are red. The amber doesn't mean necessarily they're a long way behind. I think we've got 2 red ones and 14 amber ones, so
Okay.
I'm not.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Take your advice. So yeah, it's been in the annual plan. That's good. I just, it's a case of Lyndall being concerned that we just, potentially we slip. And I think for us, we have to be as much concerned about our operational spend and what we intend to do in terms of those level of service targets, which are largely operational, as in contrast to, say, dare I say it, in Invercargill City or Southern District with a CapEx plan, which it does or doesn't deliver on and builds up over time. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that, Tanya. That's really helpful. Thank you, Lyndall.
Great. Okay, so any other questions in that section?
The only question briefly was understanding the nature of I'm looking at the summary on page 62. And the first 2 points were quite good, and then a full-year surplus 3 million is forecast for June 2022, an expected result 3.9 million lower than a budgeted surplus of 6.9. And that certainly, I just wonder whether a little bit more explanation about that. And I do know if you then flick down further, you are elaborating a little bit more, because I guess it's the nature of why some of the government funding projects have been not quite in alignment with their timetable, and obviously we can't ask the government for that money. So it's not really like a trading outcome that's negative to us. It's more of a timing of capital projects. It just perhaps it doesn't quite allow the reader perhaps to understand why that big deficit or that $3.9 million deficit is there. It's all on capital projects. And I know if you do read lower, you understand that point, but I think from a layperson, whether we fully recognise what's happening there, it's not because we have to account for the revenue from those government-funded projects as part of our revenue. We portray a good surplus, and in this instance, we're not quite getting that surplus because we haven't got to the point where we could ask the government for the money, and as a result, we're perhaps nearly $4 million behind. But it's understanding it's the complication of those shovel-ready projects and how we have to account for it, which perhaps builds a picture that maybe not as negative as it actually is. I sort of asked my question and tried to answer it at the same time.
Which is awfully good of you. Anybody else got a comment on that?
Well, part of it is that, Tanya, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the way we do our reporting, because we don't normally do this sort of work. So we're trying to bring it through the P&L and show it. So it throws some of the things forward. There are some challenges in that shovel-ready work that we talked about this morning in the workshop that will actually come right, but we're going to have to go through with what we've got. So it looks better than what it actually is, because that work is actually committed, that money is actually committed. So,
Tony, did you have a comment to make there?
I think Councillor Baird his comment is fair. I've tried very hard to actually explain what is quite difficult to explain, hence my attempt to pull it out into different pieces. Capital income or income from the government, it is all about the timing of it, and so you're correct that it's not a bad news picture. And saying that, I'll take the point and see what we can build into the summary in the future. We've moved from having a long summary and not much detail to having a short summary and trying to detail it. So we've got to find a balance.
Yeah, and really appreciate your efforts at continually, that being a moving feast, Tanya. And it would be fair to say that there's a much more clear explanation of the government funding than there was even a year ago.
but they trick our the communication going forward is going to be really important, and this starts to think about how do we communicate what we see or don't see and work programs and money flows through our balance sheet so the ratepayer knows that it's been looked at with the, all the time with a good set of eyes.
Yeah.
So,
Bruce, did you have a comment?
Yeah, look, Tony, just to confirm my understanding, the forecast $5.2 million spend will almost solely be on the jobs for nature and equivalent programs, not the resilience programs, because that spend will be capitalised, right?
Sorry, Bruce, is that page 64?
Yep. Oh no, 65. I'm just looking at the breakout of the P&L. The spend we have on the climate resilience
Yes.
projects won't be
Sorry.
reflected here. It'll be, that's part of the problem, Lloyd, is that the 8 million that we're projecting, forecasting, includes the capital subsidy, if you will, on the projects, which we won't have to spend here because it's going to be sitting in the balance sheet. So it complicates it further.
Yeah.
But that 5.2, as I say, presumably relates to jobs for nature and all those other ones.
So through you, Chair, without wanting to make this statement even larger, it has occurred that it might be easier if the government-funded projects was clearly jobs for nature and the climate resilience, because they are quite different. Jobs for nature, the money comes in and out. It is, as Bruce has pointed out, it is the expenditure of 3.8 to date and 5.2. But we receive income only for the government, the climate resilience, and we don't see spending in the profit and loss. The spending turns up in the balance sheet. So that adds to the confusion, and it's not dissimilar to many councils, but we haven't been in this position before.
Yeah.
Okay, just zipping through then. Anything else from those, the page 63 or 64 that anybody has questions on? Investment income questions?
Perhaps I could cover the investment income in the next item, Chair, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, anything else from that? Item 2? Councillor McCallum?
Tony, just a couple of things. Further down, it looks like we're reporting on 7 months of the year for a cash flow, not 12. Is that fair?
We just traditional. We've tried to report through the main season till the end of December. We can have a rolling 12 months if that's what you want to see. What we're doing though, we do have to be aware that we're forecasting into the next financial year, and sometimes when we do that forecast, we haven't announced a rates increase or agreed a rates increase to do that. So often when you're forecasting into the next financial year, we just need to be aware of that it has to be on some degree of assumption.
I understand that, but it looks like the April to December numbers stop and start at the same line, but there's 3 months that aren't there at all. That's how I read it. So I don't know what's happening for those 3 months.
It's going to go down, Councillor.
He wants it, between the eyes, Tony.
I was just on page 69, we start in April and then we finish in December, but it looks like the 2 points on that line are the same. But I know what the cash flow looks like, but it's not. It looks like a 12-month cash flow reported over 7 months. That's what it looks like to me.
They can we focus on the cash flow, Chair? Because we have expanded it from the last meeting. So last meeting we had a 6-month cash flow. We have got to nine.
Good.
And we've pulled the operating cash flow, and well, it's been the same to be fair, but we've tried to highlight the 2 parts of the government funded, as I referred to before, the climate resilience piece, where we have income comes in quarterly, the money's going out monthly, as you can see, and that monthly program there is as per the project manager's most recent cash flow forecast. Month delayed, actually, assuming that we're paying it a month after the activity. We've also assumed that we get our money from Kanoa a month later, because that does tend to happen. And then the government funded Biodiversity Jobs for Nature program, significantly different cash flows. They come in much more lumpy, and the bigger one there in September being the Wilding Pines project. And of course, the Jobs for Nature, with over a 12-month period, they should equal close to zero. When I say close to, that we have a contribution towards those projects. Then the Waituna Trust projects, you might remember, we have been holding funds on behalf of that project, and reasonably substantial funds, 1.7 million at balance date. Over the next 15 months, those funds will run down, and we will have zero funds being held on behalf of that. And so the cumulative effect is that we reach a negative bank balance of $2 million in October. And when we see the next cash flow for the remaining 3 months and into next year, you'll see it different again as we ramp up the climate resilience work.
It's a good cash flow, Tanya. I appreciate what you've done there. And certainly managing the flow of funds is very good too, not seeing us dip deep into overdraft for too many months, just a little dip before we get our main flow of income with rates resets. So that's good looking cash flow.
Thank you.
Councillor McPhail.
Very good. Move into the rate debtors.
Surprise!
Are we getting worse with our debtors, or just a wee explanation around that? Just the overall feeling with obviously a higher rates increase, and is there a bit more pressure on?
Page 70, the rates outstanding. Yeah. Look, it's different to last year. It's definitely different to last year, and we're making progress. I did say to you, we hope to be closer to the end of June where we were last year, and we will be closer, but we're not going to be the same. So we have more and more people coming onto payment plans. So we have still people applying for the 3 payment plan. And then we have people who are actually, to come onto the payment plan, you have to be current with your rates, all right, and stay current so that you can meet your direct debits. But for those who have longer term outstanding debt, those people are going into payment arrangements with us to pay off the outstanding debt. We had 1,700 letters go out to overdue ratepayers, and as always, when I say overdue, those with longer term debts, and they've been responding to that, and again setting up arrangements to catch up. So there's definitely an increase in the balance, and you'll see the percentage on the right hand side here. It says rates rates balance as a percentage of the current rates, not including the 3 payment plan. 2 years ago, that was 8%. 1 year ago, it was 5%, as we made some headway. Or you might remember we recovered $500,000 through mortgage claims on the banks. But we're sitting at 2,600 at March. Now, I think in the text here, I've suggested that the 27th of May, we would have been down to 1.8 million. So we've made quite an improvement since March. What's my prediction for June? I think 1.4, 1.5 possibly. And we'll keep working on it, because we'll have to then go back to these people who haven't responded to us and see what we can do next to help them and help us. And
Any large balances in there, or are they all largely just cumulative amount of small balances?
Mostly cumulative, yeah. Those that had longer date debt with us, that had a mortgage, have been picked up in the past. So this is made up of many smaller ones. So we will do another full review on the 1st of July, at which point we're legally able to take the next step. But yes, so I expect to see our 3 payment plan increasing, and it does adds to the workload, to be fair, but it's important for the ratepayers. When I say the workload, to the staff's workload, there's been a lot more interaction from our customers in the last 6 months, as you can imagine. Just of note too, there's been still a huge turnover of properties. Our rates officer was telling us that we've processed 1,400 sales since February, which is quite significant. Sales and subdivisions, it's still a really busy office with regard to rates. Pleasing to note, you'll see the other debt though is reducing, or the 90-day debt in the normal sundry debtors, and as I say, a large part of the consents now that come out of the consents office completed are no longer owing us money. We owe them a refund, and that puts us in a much more powerful place, and that we're not at risk particularly from people who might have not been happy with the outcome if they didn't get their consent, or they didn't get a consent with conditions they wanted. And the smaller number of very large consents, we keep our consents managers very good at keeping an eye on and ensuring that they don't get interim billing.
Thanks, Tanya. I've got a question from Councillor McCallum.
Just a heads up, really, Tanya, at the Mural Forum the other day, Great South were reporting. I'm not sure, we may need to make allowances on their balance sheet for some of their activity. Can we follow that up to see if that's real or perceived?
Great South.
Yes. In relation to space ops.
Okay, thank you.
I can give you more detail later, but I think we just need to make sure we're aware of some of the interaction CCOs that are around, and some of the liabilities and risks that come back onto the full councils. And I understand we have some exposure there as well.
Thank you. Any more questions on this section? Liking the graphs. Would somebody like to move the financial report? Thanks, Councillor McPhail. Seconded, Councillor Beard. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Item 3, the investment report. Tanya.
Thank you, Chair. So again, we took some time to highlight what has been happening in the market. If you spend any time on the media, you'll find it quite either depressing or distressing, or both. So I had a good look into the portfolio and spoken several times with JB Weir, and then I had previously asked them actually at the end of March to provide me with some performance data, because we are due to do a review this year. And so to start that process and do a bit of a desktop review, I asked them to send me some 3 and 5 year information, which I've included in here. But as between the end of March and the writing of this report, of course, we've had another 17% downturn in the equity market. But what was of interest was that our bond market is reduced in value as well, from down 700,000-800,000 for the financial year. So I wanted to explain how that had happened, and the effect of interest rates on that, what that might mean for us, and then summarise it. And if I jump to the summary on page 85, I'm just pointing out there that we budgeted for $580,000 of dividend and interest to go into the portfolio this year, and $601,000 next year. We pay $166,000 to the portfolio manager, plus taxes actually on top of that. And then we pay $116,000 is budgeted to pay into the reserves on behalf of the catchment reserves, the holders of those reserves. So the amount available to support the general rates is just on $300,000. So it isn't significant, and we made that big adjustment in the LTP for that, for the sake of prudence. What I'm saying there is that that is not at risk, and our cash flow, if anything, well, not our cash flow, our earnings into the portfolio are likely to increase somewhat as interest rates go from 1.5% to 3%. And I had an example in there of the Christchurch International Airport that we've become a bondholder in. Those commercial bonds are sitting around 5%. Because I did raise the question with Tom Phillips. I said, why do we have bonds versus having term deposits? Simple answer, please. And because there's a market value change with bonds that doesn't occur with the term deposits. And the bottom line is, he says the investment grade bonds can earn 1.5% to 2% more than term deposits. And that over the long term, that is quite substantial. Now, in the meantime, you have this fluctuation in value, which only becomes a problem if you choose to sell your bond before its date. So if you're in the market for, medium term, that's why portfolios such as ours invest in bonds. If you have a need for money shorter term, very short term, you wouldn't put it into bonds, you would put it in the bank in term deposits. He also pointed out that if we'd had it in term deposits for the last 2 years, we would have earned less than 1%. So the pros and cons, but generally a bond mixture of bonds will make up 40 to 50% of a portfolio, as it does for us. So in summary, look, the portfolio has had headwinds for the last 3 months. Back the year, if you look at page 86 now, while we've earned 681,000, there's been a negative change of 654,000 in the 1 year column. So that was a return of only 0.1%. But including that 1 year, the 5 years have still earned a return of 7.4 or 6.5 after tax per annum. And it goes on, the report goes on to detail that is actually overall ahead of the benchmarks for similar portfolios. Any questions here?
Just to let the councillors know that they don't need new glasses.
Sorry, yes.
The tables are blurry, you're not seeing.
No, I apologise. I did took a note and didn't. I was going to try and find a clearer version.
Yeah.
We're ranked 5 out of 30 on that table.
Oh, yeah, that's quite telling, actually. Bruce, thanks.
And look, I'm very grateful, Tanya, for your fulsome explanations. Can I just check, because it raised the obvious question, I couldn't see it necessarily from the cash flow, it's back to Lloyd's cash flow for 12 months. We don't need to draw down our reserve funds as we've had in the past for the coming year. In other words, that challenge around needing short-term cash isn't going to affect us.
No, we've got 1.4 million in cash sitting in the portfolio, and I mean, really, we should draw down the 300,000 a year, but we haven't in the last year. But it's sitting there, and we could take that cash out without affecting the value of the portfolio.
Sweet, that's good.
Thanks, Councillor Beard.
I wrote a note down when I attended one of the River Liaison meetings when we budgeted to give them only 1% on their reserves for the coming period from 2020 to 2023. And I know we've always been a little bit somewhat less generous perhaps on that, but it's been more certain. Are we being a little bit less generous in this coming budget period with only giving them 1% for their reserves, knowing not only that we might have negative returns from our investment portfolio, and there's definitely swings and roundabouts because we've had some very good years, but we've kept the contribution to their reserves reasonably lean, and even in the good years, and so is it reasonable to give them 1% on those reserves when we know inflation is running at certainly more than that, and even the term deposit rate is going to be more than 1% next year?
No, it's a fair observation. The budget is pretty much carried through from this year without us knowing exactly what it's going to be, but we always pay on actuals. So at the end of the year, we'll look at our equivalent actual interest rate and pay them there. So on the way down, we probably over budgeted for them. Some years ago, they were earning 5 and 6%, and we didn't respond quickly enough to that change as the market very quickly dropped. We did pay them the actuals, but their budgets were a bit out of line, and that's we need to be more responsive to those interest rate changes. We can be more responsive to those interest rate changes.
So just clarify, what drives the actual?
What the effective risk-free rate would be, or what long-term deposit rates at the bank on average over the year.
Any other questions? Councillor Fail, you look like you might have a question.
I was just going to mention lease land reserves too.
I'll
Interest, we took that off out of there.
look away, shall I?
Echo.
There's a shimmer on my face, sorry. Didn't realise.
Are you mentioning them or are you?
No.
Okay, good skull.
That's all of the financial results though. I didn't want to raise that actually.
Any other questions then for the investment report? All right, somebody like to move?
Do that.
Thank you, Bruce. Seconded by Councillor Fail. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried, thanks. Now, item 4 is the LGFA accession papers, of which there are many. And we are just waiting to are they there, Mel? We've got Chris Wood and Andrew Michael. I hope you'll tell me.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Oh, there's Chris. There's Chris.
Kia ora, Chris and Andrew, welcome. Take it away. Chris, you're on mute though.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Isn't technology wonderful when it works? Thank you, Councillor. First, I'd like to welcome Andrew Michael from LGFA. He's been supporting me along with our army of lawyers in getting us to this stage in the process of accession to LGFA. I'll take at least the cover paper as read. I don't expect people to have read the other 15 other attachments and 400 odd pages. But you'll recall that Council approved the accession to LGFA at a meeting last year, and this process, which has been a somewhat long process, actually been granted a session. We've got to this point now. What you've been provided with is, apart from my cover paper, the 15 odd associated documents prepared by Simpson Grierson, the lawyers who have been supporting us through this process. And what you're being asked to do is really just approve taking this forward to full council for approval and for document signing. But very briefly, to remind you the purpose of joining LGFA, you will recall that in the long-term plan, there was provision in the sort of cash flow that the Environment Southland for the first time would incur a certain level of debt to fund the operations going through. The accession to LGFA or membership of LGFA is part of that process. We are probably the last council, I think, apart from the Chatham Islands, to actually join the LGFA. The purpose of it is that the rate for borrowing that we can realise is one, it's cheaper than we would get on the open market. And secondly, we can borrow for a longer term than we'd be able to borrow for if we went through a standard bank process. And thirdly, we have certainty around that cost of that finance. It is fixed for the term of the loan, and Andrew will come and correct me when I make a deliberately incorrect statement. It's fixed for the term of the loan. So from an ES planning point of view, we have certainty around the cost of that borrowing. A second part of this process is realising that we also have a facility with the ANZ Bank. That was really just a short-term cash flow facility to help us through the timing between rates reception, and the cash outflows that associated with running the business. So it was a short-term borrowing facility. When we entered into that agreement with the ANZ, it was largely unsecured. ANZ were comfortable that we had rates revenue, and that was reasonably assured, and therefore that facility was given to us without any formal security over that rates revenue. Now, as part of the process with LGFA require essentially a lien over our rates revenue, as they do for all councils who borrow from them. And part of this process is granting that lien over our rates revenue. But LGFA, in discussion with LGFA, they realised that local government organisations borrow from others other than just LGFA, as we do with the ANZ. So part of that, in discussion with ANZ, we have proposed that we grant them a lien over the rates in revenue as well, in terms of security stock issue. And so we will have two parties, if you will, with a lien over our rates revenue. So part of this process is getting approval from council that we can indeed extend that security stock, which is, as I say, essentially a lien over our rates revenue, as well as that same lien be granted to LGFA. So there's those two parts: agreement that we can, that you approve our relationship with Computershare and Covenant Trustees Limited, two parties that are also required under the LGFA arrangement, both as registrar and as paying agents on behalf of Environment Southland. So approving that relationship is outlined in the debenture trust deed and the other documents there. So there's a lot to take on board. It is what we are entering into is very standard across all local government organisations who are part of LGFA. There's nothing unusual except for the additional lien over revenue, over our rates revenue granted to the ANZ. ANZ are comfortable with that because, in fact, it gives them more formal security, if you will, than they've had in the past with our somewhat informal arrangement. Really, that's it in summary. As I say, we are the last council, apart from the Chathams, to join the LGFA, but we argue it's just we need to enter this relationship because of the incurrence of debt per the long-term plan. I'm happy to take any questions, and if you ask me any difficult ones I don't know the answer to, I'll ask Andrew to step in and provide the answers.
Thanks very much, Chris. I've got lots of questions so far. Councillor McCallum and then Councillor Beard.
Chris, I understand what it is, and this is part of financial procedure. I understand that. We're actually, it's no different than a farm. There's a mortgage, there's an income stream. Who has priority? Who's first, second, and third? Who has priority on the monies here?
That's a good question.
What order do they come in?
That's a good question. Andrew, do you want to talk about the LGFA perspective when there's a claim, a double claim? If we were to default on our debt to LGFA and say to the ANZ, and both made a claim against revenue, is there a priority order around that rights to the rates income?
Thank you for having me. The answer is we have one set of standard terms by which we lend to councils at, and that's what you're acceding to. You're acceding to the same terms as all other councils have signed up for. As Chris mentioned, we have security over rates. We don't have security over any of your other assets. So, for example, we couldn't ask you, if you defaulted, we couldn't ask you to sell your shares in the port. So how we'd recover the money is over rates and future rates revenue. We're happy to, when you borrow from LGFA, we don't preclude you from borrowing from any other source that you wish to borrow from. So if there's other banks that you want to borrow from, you can do so. And we're happy to share the same security we have, which is the charge over rates, with any other lender. So in the event that ANZ signed up to those same terms and you defaulted, then the money, any rates revenue in the future will be prorated between those two parties.
Thank you, Andrew. Just one more point. Sorry to interrupt. One more point I just want to make before I forget, and just on that matter. the council determined in that previous meeting where they agreed to the accession to LGFA, a preference to become a guarantor under this relationship. Now, the guarantee that we're entering into is not against any debt of any other local government organisation. It is the debt that the LGFA has to essentially its source of funds. So if the LGFA was to default on its source of funds, repaying its source of funds, then we're a guarantor to that. The benefit of that to us, and most council organisations have become a guarantor. We didn't have to because of the relatively low level of debt we are looking to incur. But the benefit is a lower cost of finance by becoming a guarantor. So I just want to mention that before I forget to make that point.
Thanks, Chris.
Sorry, Councillor McCallum, I interrupted you. You had another question, did you?
No, I'm probably sitting in the private sector and I have first, second, third dibs on the income streams, and that's probably where I was coming from. I picked up from the point of view that the most at-risk business would be ANZ, so they would probably have bigger claws, as it were, but LGNZ would actually work with us on a longer term. But what I picked up is that you would pro rata the risk and you would share the dollars that were available to actually meet that debt. So I understand that. I understand the guarantor as well. Done that some months ago, so it's just a reminder of where that sits. So I'm comfortable.
Thanks.
So just in practical terms, how it would work is there would be an additional targeted rate imposed. So because the council would need its sort of current rates revenue to continue to operate. So an additional targeted rate would be imposed, and you'd have to look at how many years it was going to be required in terms of what the community could afford. And then it would be that additional targeted rates revenue that would be shared between the senior creditors.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. So just two questions. For the security note to the ANZ, is that a quantifiable amount? Do we limit it to a certain amount? I know we've had a facility which is upwards of 10 or 12 mil. So is it quantified in a value sense for that?
My understanding, Councillor Baird, is that we have a choice of either fixing the limit or having it basically as a floating security note. I would think the advice I've had from the lawyers, it's probably better to go with a floating security note so that it would cover any amount we chose to borrow, whether it was a larger or a smaller amount. Andrew, do you have any sort of experience with that in terms of what most councils do?
No, other than if you did sort of default on your debt, then you'd take a snapshot of any borrowing at that sort of particular time. So if we had, 10 million and ANZ had 5 million of loans that they'd sort of made, then any targeted rate that was sort of imposed in the future would be shared, 2/3 to LGFA and 1/3 to ANZ. Mm-hmm. So you'd sort of pro rata pay down that money over time.
And the second question really is that at what stage does it warrant having a rating, a credit rating? How many million do we need before it warrants us having a credit rating with Standard & Poor's?
So typically sort of our view would be that you need around 50 million of debt. The cost of a credit rating is $50,000 to $60,000 a year from either Fitch or Standard & Poor's. So you would get a saving on your debt of sort of between 10 and 20 basis points. So in simple terms, 50 million at 10 basis points would be 50,000 a year. So that would sort of cover the cost. But there may be other benefits that you get from an external rating, i.e. the community gets some, insight into the creditworthiness of the council.
Back to you, Councillor McCallum.
Yeah, Don, I'm just wondering, we may have a floating arrangement, but I think internally we need to have some benchmarks in there. I want to have something that actually triggers staff to realise where we're going with this. So if we had an internal limit that we go down, I feel more comfortable. I understand your flexibility, but I don't want to wake up one day and say, why didn't we have more control over the movement of this account?
I agree with you, Councillor McCallum, and I think perhaps that's an internal.
It's an internal matter.
We can
Yes,
impose.
it's internal.
Yep.
Yeah, Bruce.
In fact, I think it's a bit more than just voluntary. We need to develop, Chris, I've come in late, and by the way, good to see you again, Chris.
Thanks, Bruce.
We need to develop our own treasury management policies.
Mm-hmm.
So Lloyd, that's the answer to your question, is we've got a lot more work to do. This is just giving us, if we agree to this, the facility
That's
to
right.
access debt, but it doesn't drive how we access it. We have to work that one out ourselves.
Yeah.
So it does raise the question, Chris, will we, as many do, have an external advisor around the issue of treasury management policies and how we manage those going forward?
Amy, this is something that is missing from us.
Yeah,
in the policies.
we'll need to read that through. Yep.
Yes, well, it's critical before
Yeah,
we take
yes,
the first
yeah.
dollar out from our GFA.
And the external advisor,
Yep.
Yes, that's right.
particularly.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions? If there are no other questions.
And Tania's got, sorry, Councillor Ludlow, I think Tania had a question.
Oh, sorry, Tania. Go ahead.
You're on mute, Tania.
though.
More just an acknowledgement that we foreshadowed this in the LTP, and Stephen Halliwell worked with us on our new treasury management policy. And we wrote that into the, it's an active policy that we agreed and adopted at the LTP, and it does allow for the management of these funds.
Yeah.
In terms of whether we have an external advisor, we haven't appointed an external advisor because our debt is really relatively simple and quite low compared to many councils, and the cost of I won't say it's not worthy of having some review of an external advisor, but I'm just suggesting that the offer that we had was the cost was greater than the benefit of joining our GFA. So we will manage it prudently and carefully, and be assured that we can't draw down this funds without the CE being aware that we're drawing down funds. It can't be just staff members who access this. It has to go through the CE, and he or she has delegated authority from council. So it'll be well monitored, I can assure you.
Thank you. I would quite like to take the recommendations separately so that it's really clear that which should there have been any issues. I would quite like to take them all separately. So recommendation 1 is to approve the transactions specified in the A, debenture trust deed between Covenant Trustee Services Limited and Council, and B, registrar and paying agent services agreement between Computershare Investor Services Limited and Council. Somebody like to move that first recommendation, please. Thanks, Councillor Beard, seconded Councillor McCallum. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. And second recommendation is the authorised execution of the documents. Thank you, Councillor McPhail. And Councillor Beard, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And third one is to agree to the issue of security stock to ANZ Bank to provide security for the credit facility Environment Southland has with the bank.
I can do that one.
Thank you, Councillor McCallum. Councillor McPhail, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. It's always lots of words. Thanks very much, everybody. Really appreciate your work, Chris
Thank you.
and Andrew, and no doubt we'll see you again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Lowe.
Oh, is anybody else overheating? It's quite warm. Surely not, Councillor McPhail. It's riveting. Item 5 is Civic Financial Services Limited Annual Report.
So
Fun times, take it away.
This is a reasonably straightforward item, just documenting the Civic Financial Services report. So Civic Financial Services, you might recall, provide insurance services to the sector and also superannuation and KiwiSaver services to our staff. The item was really presenting the annual report and talking about the annual general meeting, which we are asking council whether they wish to attend or delegate or set up a delegate for the Civic Financial Services Chairman as a proxy and provide direction to the proxy on how they wish to vote.
Questions? Councillor McCallum.
My first thing is I've looked through the financial statements. I am confused about how they report them because it looks like fees and income are on the same line. So, but considering we're 0.09% of this fund, I have to take it that they are correct, but I do find some of the language a bit difficult. I think, Madam Chair, to move forward would be just appoint the meeting chair and let them work to discretion. We're so small, even if we're against the resolution, it wouldn't count. We're one of the lowest members of their portfolio. So.
Any other questions, thoughts, Bruce?
I'm looking at these. I mean, the biggest issue here is their deferred tax asset in the balance sheet action. Can they realise it and they continue to make profits? Someone can assume that they will. That's investment income on their own activities, not their clients. Look, I'd just add to that that we should, in regard to the second one, resolution, Lloyd, I just suggest that we would also provide the direction of what is it, the affirmative for the two things, which is the appointment of the auditor, or reappointment of the auditors, and sorry, the first one was the appointment of the people that offer themselves for re-election. They're all good folk. I know of.
Let's take your word for it. Any other questions, comments? Okay.
I'm happy to move that direction.
Thanks. So we're clear about what those resolutions
So
are?
the second one is that we vote, we direct the chairman to vote for the annual report and for the appointment of remuneration.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Which takes us to the annual activity plan, which is item 7. So that's page 293. If you're shuffling the papers or scrolling frantically, don't get RSI. The annual activity plan. Tanya, are you taking us through that? Thank you.
Sorry, 2 amendments highlighted in blue there where we've been unable to access the records simply because they're not complete yet as a result of the carryover of audit issues. There's only adjustments, I believe, Chair.
And also from me, the financial delegations review will not be available for a next meeting, so we will be deferring that.
How far are we deferring that?
We're sort of thinking, given the way in which we needed to time the financial OPAC reviews, you'll see on the annual activity report, we've actually got 2 risk OPACs in quite short succession, and question mark as to how meaningful it will be to have a secondary risk meeting after the first one. And the proposal was on the table to change that to a risk workshop. And actually I've been speaking to Chris Woods about getting Aon to come and talk to us about risk and move that forward. So I'd need to see where they've landed on the time frame. So I'll be proposing to do that on the 14th of September.
The financial.
No. I was saying that was that's the risk meeting. Proposing firstly to change rather than have it as a risk meeting, given that we've got 2 in short succession, to have the risk meeting on the 22nd of June, to have a risk workshop instead of the meeting on the 4th of August, and then defer the financial delegations review to the finance meeting on the 14th of September.
Okay, so instead of 2 risk meetings in a row, we would have a meeting and then a workshop. There's no point having a meeting for the sake of it.
Yeah, it's just that
And
it's just
actually
for a short time in
Yeah.
terms of.
Totally understand that, but the 8th of October, we've got elections, so I'm just wondering, what do we need to do before that period? And how do we set up the council for after that? Because there's going to be, I'm assuming, some new faces around the table. We're going to have to do not only orientation, but we have to come up to speed with some of the direction that's been set. So what legacy do we need to leave and how do we pick it up now? So
My main sense for the financial delegations review was just to, as I understand it from Chris, is just to provide some clarity and some streamline. We've got some anomalies sitting in there at the moment. It's about making it a little bit more straightforward and easy to operate.
and checking, sorry, Amy, and checking that the levels are appropriate.
Appropriate, yeah.
That's the key, really.
Yeah, I think Chris's initial sense was that, you know, they were low for what they were. They haven't necessarily moved with the times, and there was an opportunity to review them accordingly and just standardise and streamline them so they're easier to operate.
if that's the case, then combine the two meetings together and let's have one go at it.
Do you mean the workshop or do you mean the risk and finance meetings to be together?
You're saying the 4th and the 22nd. 22nd of June and the 4th of August.
Yeah.
Two risk ones.
Right, so you'd, okay, to have
Not the
a risk meeting and a workshop on the same day. So that's what you're saying, yep.
And if I can just support what Lloyd's saying, Lloyd, just remind me, when did Lloyd sign off? What day? I forgot their annual.
Same, sorry. Don't have
It's
it on
post
top
the
of
elections, right?
Yes.
Yes. Who knows? Tanya, do you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, the council's,
When does Deloitte's plan to sign off on, Tanya? Do you know that off the top of your head?
we intend to present the report prior to the council dissolution.
With the audit opinion?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Oh,
So
okay.
that 14th must be the day which will be.
7th of October is the last day of council.
That's right.
Yes.
The election's on the 8th, but to do the pre-work,
Is it? How fun.
The committee needs to do its work on the
Last in
annual report to
Yeah.
recommend to council
Yeah.
that they should adopt the final account report and receive the auditor's report.
that's right.
All I'm trying to reflect here is that meeting, whether the opinion is pre or post the election is going to be focused on that.
Yeah.
Should be.
There's nothing wrong with having a workshop and a meeting. on the
No,
same day.
not at all.
Question being, is there enough content for the June 22nd meeting, and then
I don't think
a
there is.
short period of time?
I don't think we've got enough.
Yeah, that's not available for the June 22nd meeting anyway, so whatever you do, it's by absence.
So
I see you
the
saying.
4th of August would be better for me, 22nd of.
Yeah, so
So
I
you're
think,
saying
Makes
say
sense,
between the
that's a
meeting
good
on the
call.
22nd and have it on the 4th instead?
Yeah.
Okay.
And have
I'm
a
trying to get-
full day of risk.
I'm trying to get value out of the time.
Yeah. Would make a lot of sense for me. Probably helpful.
Busy season.
On the 4th.
Oh, right, there's a council meeting. I see.
Sorry, we're just working out what else is in the schedule.
Well, we can still have the OPAC meeting on okay, so we will just need to look at the timing of the workshop. Okay, because there's another committee meeting on that day.
But
But
the
we can
aim
do
is to
that.
have the meeting.
But the actual meeting will be the 4th of August and not the
Okay.
22nd.
And,
Yep.
and if possible, if we have a workshop, I'd like Bruce to be there.
Yes,
for
so.
that. I think you would have value this morning of being at their workshop. So I think, can
Had
we,
the same thought myself.
can we loop that in a little
Yep.
bit so that just timetable us?
That means that, yes. That frees up the 22nd for something else. No doubt.
Fantastic.
Great.
Okay.
Anything else on the annual activity plan?
Move that.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Callum, Mr Robertson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. That will take us to moving into public excluded, if I'm not mistaken, for the reasons of
to carry on with arms prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations, and to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantage.
Thank you, Mover and seconder, please. Thank you, councillors Martel and Beard. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Would anybody like